You can go ahead, Gauri. Gauri, you can start.
Madam, he's saying you can start.
Sham, can I start? I can't hear him.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, everybody. From the Tamil Heritage Trust, we are extremely happy to welcome all of you to the latest edition of our monthly talk series, August 2024. All of us must have wondered from time to time as to what is rock art and what is its significance. Essentially, it's a global phenomenon. Rock art has been found across almost all old civilizations and the cultural variations across the world. Archaeologically, rock art is defined as a man made drawing, sketch, or depiction on a natural stone surface. Lot of rock arts that we have discovered, both prehistoric and historic, have been found essentially in natural caves or partially sheltered rock shelters. A prime reason could be that they are the only places where they manage to survive. Traditionally, rock arts are fascinating storehouses of information that give us a lot of historic and cultural details about the civilization or the society that created them. In India, too, we have a large repository of rock art. Across various states, we can find rock art in natural caves, and they come in a variety of depictions, narratives, and styles. To throw more light upon this, we have a lecture today titled Art for Art's Sake, Memory Store or Early Historical Sense by Dr. Ajay Pratap of Banaras Hindu University, who will be introducing us to the rock art of the Eastern Vindhyan region, an area where he has conducted extensive research for almost 15 years. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, madam.
Before we move on to the main program, I'd like to give you a brief introduction about Tamil Heritage Trust, which is our organization. Tamil Paramparya Arakkatalai or Tamil Heritage Trust is an organization that was started almost 14 years ago by a group of like-minded volunteers. The main intent behind starting this organization was to understand, appreciate, celebrate, and disseminate various aspects of Indian heritage and history, not just for the scholarly and the erudite, but the enthusiastic average public. Towards this end, THT conducts a variety of programs right round the year. The first set of programs we conduct are our talks and seminars. We have monthly heritage talk series. On the first Saturday of every month, we have an online talk, and we are in the midst of the August 2024 session. Another program that we conduct is called the Pechu Kacheri or the Oratory Concert, which is conducted in the month of December to collaborate and coincide with the Margari Isai Kacheris of Chennai. On a pre-curated topic, across 2 days, we have 8 to 10 speakers analyzing various aspects of a topic. They are often joined by enthusiastic volunteers from THT. Another program that we conduct in the month of June every year is called an Indology Festival, and this is a more academic and scholarly event. This is an online event where across 6 days, we have 12 subject experts or scholars analyzing a topic in depth and covering various aspects of it. This year, the Indology Festival conducted in June 2024 was called Harappan Civilization, A Century of Discovery, meant to commemorate the centenary of the announcement of the discovery of the Harappan civilization to the world at large. At THT, we also conduct various workshops where anyone can register and participate. We have one-day workshops called How to See a Temple, How to See a Museum, etc., which are conducted in 2 sessions. In the forenoon session, we have a series of lectures. In the afternoon, the participants are taken to a practical site where we elucidate what was discussed earlier. Then on and off, we conduct classroom sessions on topics like Grantham script, ancient Indian astronomy, ancient Indian mathematics, etc. Another program that we have is called the Alamar Avai, where we target the school teachers of Tamil Nadu. Over a series of weekend lectures, aspects of Indian heritage and history are discussed. The idea being that these teachers take these back to their own students, thus further spreading awareness. Another program that we have is called a docent training program, where participants are given both the theoretical knowledge and the practical experience in how to conduct tours of heritage sites and historical monuments in a professional manner to a group of audience. We are about to launch the next edition of our docent training program, and registrations are open right now. Another program that we have, which is largely in-house and meant for self-education and self-enhancement, we call it the Site Seminar. This is conducted in the month of January every year, and we identify a particular site of importance within India. And over a course of about 3 to 4 months, our volunteers study various aspects of the site extensively. We have a number of in-house seminars, and then armed with all this knowledge, we visit these sites and experience them totally. We come back and document all that we have studied. From THT, we also have instituted 2 awards. The first such award, given to honor individual contributions in the field of Indian heritage and history, is named after our co-founder and is called the Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award. We are into the 5th year of this award and currently in the process of receiving applications for the year 2024. The second award is given for contributions to the field of Indian epigraphy and is called the V. Venkaiah Epigraphy Award. This is named after Rai Bahadur V. Venkaiah, who was the first official Indian epigraphist and is instituted by Miss Sunita Madhavan, his great-granddaughter. THT has been entrusted with the responsibility of administering this award. Into the 3rd year of this award, this year the award was given to senior epigraphist Dr. V. Vedachalam, and the presentation ceremony was just last week in Chennai. At THT, we have a dedicated YouTube channel where you can find links to all our past talks. Kindly subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive notifications of our future events. We have a dedicated website. These are our social media handles. To join our mailing list, you may mail us at this address. Last but not the least, we are a voluntary organization and do not have any dedicated financial backing. So kindly contribute generously using this barcode and this address. As I had already mentioned, today Dr. Ajay Pratap of the Banaras Hindu University will be discussing in detail about the rock art of the Eastern Vindhyan region, with specific references to the earliest discovery of rock art there, the distribution and antiquity, the variety of themes, narratives, and styles depicted there, and the current research that is going on. Professor Ajay Pratap is part of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Banaras Hindu University since 2004 and has carried out extensive field explorations both in the Rajmahal Hills and the Eastern Vindhyas region to document shifting cultivation and rock art respectively. A PhD from the Department of Archaeology, University of Cambridge, Professor Pratap took his BA Honours in History from St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and MA in Ancient Indian History and Archaeology from the Deccan College, Pune University. Apart from his research projects, he has also authored several research papers, 4 books, and other articles. One second. Yeah. His monographs include The Hoe and the Axe, Ethno-History of Shifting Cultivation in East India, published by Oxford University Press, Delhi in 2000. Indigenous Archaeology in India, Prospects for an Archaeology of the Subaltern. Rock Art of the Vindhyas, an Archaeological Survey. Ideas and Images, a Historical Interpretation of Eastern Vindhyan Rock Art India, all published by Archaeopress, Oxford. Out of these, the last one, Ideas and Images Historical Interpretation, is the most recent publication, and he himself will be talking about it at the end of his talk. Now I welcome Dr. Ajay Pratap to take over the stage and deliver his lecture. Once again, a very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, madam.
I'll just open your PPT.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just 1 minute, 1 second, 1 minute, 1 second. One second. Sir. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, I'll just share the screen now. Can you see, sir?
Yes.
Can you see, sir?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Professor Pratap, can you see?
Yes, madam, I can.
Okay. Yeah, you may continue now.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, to start off, I would like to thank the Tamil Heritage Trust for having invited this talk. And I have been really looking ahead to sharing some of the work that we have been doing in the Vindhyan Ranges over here, not simply because of the regionality of or the regional uniqueness of this corpus of rock paintings that we have discussed, that we shall be discussing, but because I think we will attempt to analyze the importance to history or the historical significance of this corpus, admitting right away that some of it is truly prehistoric. So this problem of how to actually see the same type of paintings which fall into a prehistoric bracket, and those that are similar but are very clearly in the historical period. So, does historical time or prehistoric time differ from each other, and does it actually affect our understanding of the data? Will be in the background of this discussion. I may also qualify my presentation by saying that I have approached the study of rock art as not somebody who wishes to specialize so much in rock paintings of India, which are extremely vast, as Dr. Narayan has been saying already, that it is found in most parts of the country and it is extremely old. So I didn't wish to actually specialize in rock art or become a rock art specialist as much as to actually see how this might be of use for historical purposes. I teach ancient Indian history, or was teaching. I've now retired from BHU teaching service after 20 years of teaching. And the interest in these issues has become even stronger. The third brief comment I would make in terms of explaining my perspective is that I've actually been working with tribal history. And my first project was in the Santhal Parganas district of Jharkhand, which is the northernmost part abutting onto the Ganges. And I looked at shifting cultivation over there and their history, which was pretty well documented from 18th century onwards once the British arrived in India. But for comparatively, when I started working in the Eastern Vindhyan Ranges, which is close to Varanasi and therefore easily accessible from here and makes for a stable and regular field area which can be explored, I found that there were records were extremely poor in this area for some odd reason, and there is not the same continuity as in the old province of Bengal in terms of land records and so on at the micro level. So there was immediately a pressure as to what sources we could hunt to reconstruct the local history, given that that was the area of my interest. And such antiquities, broadly speaking, and the symbolic material that we encountered provides interesting ground to actually consider the history of the area. So this is the point of view from which we are approaching rock paintings as something that was deposited in deep time and therefore should technically serve as a source material for talking about the long-term history of the area. So, to start off the discussion, we could consider the importance of prehistory, which is actually the first rung of history, but there's an absence of written records during this period. And although archaeologists are able to recover much of what happened in the prehistoric past through their excavations and recovery of stone tools and occupation floors and debitage of various kinds and carbonized specimens, the paleobotanical and paleontological human and faunal data, which tell us a lot about human activities, society, structures, and so on at the time. There remains a huge corpus of symbolic material, which apparently started being deposited from the Upper Paleolithic at least. And this has been rather less analyzed than desirable. So, next slide, please. Yeah. So, inferring human behavior, uh, recently there has been a very interesting publication by Professor Padaya of Deccan College called Cognitive Archaeology, or Cognitive Aspects of the Indian Archaeological Data. And he speaks of symbolic material. He uses a very interesting term called mentifacts as opposed to artifacts. If artifacts like stone tools represent uh, solid three-dimensional objects with which the practical business of life was made possible, then what role do symbols play? And since obviously they had some importance, otherwise they would never be made in such profusion, that they are better labeled as mentifacts, i.e., artifacts resembling or representing thoughts of the same prehistoric actors who fashioned these stone tools and what have you. Symbolic data is also important in a larger frame in the worldwide study of early humans in terms of the evolution of speech and language. And here is a very simple way of actually looking at rock art, that in many instances, when certain natural phenomena needed to be explained to children, uh, given that they were away from the theater of action, if a rhino was seen at a great distance away from a shelter, or if an elephant was seen, or a wild buffalo, or cattle, or whatever, or smaller animals, then the easiest way to bring the name of that animal into the lexicon and to explain to the young cave dwelling child is to draw a picture. And in the act of explaining which animal that represents, the particular word denoting it would be learnt. So this is an argument, fascinating argument that emerges in this debate. May I have the next one, please? Yeah. So, but in India, symbolic activity as such, through the work of Giriraj Kumar and Robert Bednarik, mainly at Bhimbetka and at Dharaki Chattan, we know that it is extremely old, and petroglyphs as such, the cup marks, are found in both these locations, in Chambal Valley and in Bhimbetka, and they are of great antiquity, maybe 200,000 years or even older. So that's several lakh years, and uh, the business of paintings as such starts much later, with Upper Paleolithic being considered as a cutoff for the uh, Indian uh, Indian locations. So next, please. So the final point I want to make in this regard of the importance of about the importance of prehistory is that actually the study of prehistory is a little, it's very popular in the university circles, but so far as the public is concerned, the percolation of knowledge about our prehistory, or indeed its interlocking with early history, is not that explicit, nor in fact, if you come to think of it, is it emphasized very clearly in our museum collections, which are the main interface with the public. And there may be a few good reasons for that, in that when the British uh, started constructing the early history of India, uh, I think it was limited mostly to urban histories. And while very notable work was done in prehistory by Robert Brucewood and a couple of Britishers here as well in Mirzapur and Sonbhadra, the whole idea that it is our own history that we look at when we look at prehistory and not somebody else's is an idea that has still to be banished or exorcised. So the idea of local evolution and long-term histories is very feasible and very viable. In fact, that is probably the only correct picture in the subcontinent. But as things stand, the interlocking of both data, which is, for instance, rock paintings, and early history, is a matter that spreads itself over extremely disparate sort of landscapes like rural and urban. So we find that our own appreciation of the linkages with our own early history are not as solid as they could be. Next, please. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, so where do we place symbolic activity in the subcontinent in this whole business of evolution of speech and language in terms as discussed by cognitive psychologists? So I've been reading a couple of articles by Michael Arbib and a more recent work by Duner and Alberger. The latter are Swedish historians who have brought out a very interesting book. It is there in my bibliography. It came out in 2019, and they have envisaged cognitive history. You see, a history through symbolic artifacts, history of humanity in this case. And Michael Arbib's work is actually tracing the evolution of speech and language through all these stages of hominid development. And the simple model that one may extract from his work is that communication is actually, or means of communication are used to share experiences that are acquired by individuals, whether early hominins or modern humans. And to do this, and this is a point emphasized in two very important studies of Dr. Padaya's material in Hunski Valley. One is his own, and the other is C.T. Shipton's, in which these early hominins are indicated to have used gestures and mimes and types of sounds, proto speech, and these gradually sort of, the biological system adapts, and the equipment for proper speech production is acquired much later with increasing cranial capacities and so on. But language comes very much later, possibly only with Homo erectus. What could have happened before is proto language and so on. But language itself is based on a certain set of mental concepts and templates in which there are, images, and there are geometries involved. There is more recent work now as to how the mind actually encodes visual data, and you have to take it from me in this case that the author of it, a French anthropologist, says that the mind encodes visual data in terms of geometric shapes, and these are lines and triangles and squares, and this is how visual data is actually encoded in the mind. So the manufacture of the earliest artifacts like stone tools in geometric shapes and leading up to abstract material symbolism may actually be connected events. I mean, stone tools, the manufacture of stone tools assumes a certain sense of geometry, and which is innate in the hominid species, and the abstraction of the same geometric shapes that are used for stone tool manufacture give rise to symbolism such as painted material. So there's absolute connection between the two: stone tool manufacture, the use of geometries in that, and the use of geometries in rock paintings, at least Upper Paleolithic onwards. Next slide, please. So if we take that as a given, then what could be a broad chronological sequence in terms of our Indian corpus of symbols through various media? First, we would have to have a language for sharing experience, whether it is visual language, whether it is proto speech, or it is, Homo erectus onwards, language in some form for actually communicating verbally. So that leads to tool manufacture, because it is cooperative activity, is not an individual accomplishment, as is well brought out in the discussion of one of the oldest Acheulean troves in India, which is in the Hunski Valley, that some amount of sociality is extremely important among hominins to be able to accomplish all this, the chain operatoire that is involved in manufacture of Acheulean tools. So from language to tool manufacture, and then the business of abstract depictions, whatever their purpose. So paintings have to come pretty early in the sequence of things, and from rock paintings to three-dimensional uh, carved stone material, because the dexterity for carving stone is already acquired, and in the rock art phase, those for two-dimensional shapes. So from rock art, it should lead to sculpture and other types of stele and so on in fixed location inside caves, and then on to historical period, uh, or at least proto-historic seals and ceilings, which are notable in the aspect of being portable. I don't think anything that is painted on rocks is portable at all or is found replicated elsewhere. So that sort of sharing and communication is not possible, one would think, through the media of rock paintings, but they are, for instance, through Harappan seals and such like. So the portability of thoughts and communication comes with urbanization or early urbanization or the first urbanization, and that I think is as it should be, because the requirement for sending the same messages all over the place is not something that is required in prehistory, since society is village based and pretty much self-sufficient village life happens at the time. But that changes with trade and urbanism. So, while there's high art, there's also terracotta and human and animal forms in portable shapes, Neolithic onwards, all over the country. I come from Bihar, so I can talk about Chiran and the amount of terracotta material that is collected from around 2000 BC, and much older, of course, in Uttar Pradesh. So, that is the axis in which, for instance, agriculture travels. The date for domestication of rice in Uttar Pradesh Goldiva is around 6000 BC, and that at Chiran is about 2000. So there's a depth of time. And also, if rock art is the source of the later three-dimensional imagery, then by definition it can be found only in place where there are rocks, which is in a mountain range. And Goldiva is very not only far from here; it's in the heart of the Gangetic Plains, with no evident sources of stones around them, much less mountains. And thereafter, Vindhyas also have the earliest type of pottery, which is Mesolithic, the famous corded ware, incised corded ware, and others, which carry designs which are comparable to local rock art. The cross hatchings and the wavy lines and so on, they exist absolutely in rock paintings. Perhaps they are there in some of the slides, and they are translated into the pottery. Okay, next slide, please. But a broader view of the debate is here necessary, and there are as many as 6 or 7 different schools of interpreting rock art, and that itself is not surprising at all, because as a primary source of human behavior, it does lend itself to even greater number of interpretations, and perhaps the work of interpretation is not going to stop with these 6 or 7, but it will keep on evolving as the sister disciplines like psychology or genetics or whatever else develops. The same data source uh, lends itself to greater interpretations. But where it is at this point of time, the interpretation of rock art within our own country, it actually, there's one stream which is scientific evolutionary, which is, for instance, Giriraj Kumar and Robert Bednarik's work um, in Bhimbetka and in Chambal Valley and in many other places within the country, where they would like to see how we can understand the business of biological and cognitive evolution, but sticking strictly to scientific procedures and not necessarily venture into subsidiary fields. So that is one. And again, on a worldwide scale, there is also a perspective that regards rock paintings as rather more representing ritual or religion. Now, this itself, as an Indian, I find this slightly difficult to swallow, because of the kind of material we've been encountering in Vindhyas, where a lot of the rock paintings are entirely secular. They're very young individuals who seem to be playing with paint and making images, much as in Gangetic Plains sites, you can imagine, or even in Harappa and other early urbanization sites, that the terracotta actually constitute the toys. So, in places where there are mountains and such, clay soils do not obtain, the idea that rock paintings could be toy would be a kind of abstract or vicarious toy play is something that has to be admitted. So, a priori, that it represents some esoteric hunting magic or shamanism, I find that on the extreme side, but that, of course, does not discount that some of the images might actually have had religious value. In fact, in southern Uttar Pradesh, in the Son Valley, some artifacts from the Upper Paleolithic have attracted the interpretation that they were symbolic and perhaps religious objects, such as a particular piece of stone that was located by Jonathan McEnroe and Professor Jan Pal. I've seen the actual artifact in Professor Pal's department at Allahabad, and it's pretty impressive the way it is. But there is no way one can buy that rock art can be explained entirely by ritual or religion related hypotheses. Then there's an older work of 1990 by Stephen Maithan, and he has been working in West Asia more recently, comparing the symbolism of early temples like Göbekli Tepe, and there's a comparable temple in Malta, which is across the Mediterranean Sea from Göbekli Tepe and so on. And he finds that there are certain symbols which are common to different places at distances from each other. So there seems to be a pretty early system of sharing of these symbolism over great distances in West Asia. And that is worth thinking about for our own context too, because we've been surveying parts of Narmada Valley also to see what kind of motifs are in common and what are different between the eastern fringe of Uttar Pradesh and the central Narmada basin. So people have been connected. Trade in raw material for stone tool making has been known from prehistory. So if such exchanges are taking place over great distances, why not ideas of design and other cultural symbology? So that leads us to the next general parameter, which is landscape marker. Now, when hunter gatherers or even pastoralists or early farmers colonize areas in a pre urban or pre industrial sort of context, then landscape marking to assert territory is, of course, of great importance to to mark which territory is to be exploited by which group. And in such an enterprise, rock paintings would have a tremendous role. There are also more anthropological studies, say by Lau in South Africa and Ensor in North America, which emphasize that rock art is a good site for considering prehistoric kinships, where there are groups of people, even band societies of up to 30 people or more. Kinship relations are bound to obtain, such as mother, father, and children, and grandparents, and so on. Then how can that be read from backwards from symbolic data? So these two uh, papers cited in my and so is a book. These two cited in my bibliography should provide the lead. And it has been an old argument in India that it is for design and decoration, with analogies with, say, Madhubani paintings or Goan paintings or Jadoo Patiya or Pabuji Ki Pahad, that they are actually meant to design and decorate, while they do carry some elements of history. And the last two are actually related. The memory, rock art as a way of storing memory externally, is an idea that came in the late 1990s with Colin Renfrew's book on becoming human, and in which he discusses European rock art, and with the appearance of the Canadian psychologist Merlin Donald's work on the evolution of the modern mind, in which he talks about 4 or 5 stages of evolution of cognition, in which he sees each evolutionary step as a product of culture. He says evolution, biological evolution, does not happen by itself. The whole process of humans evolving, especially, involves and engages with culture. And language itself is, of course, a cultural product. And therefore, creation of memory records is something very special to being human and is fraught with meaning. And finally, most recently in the last decade, we've been working with rock art material since 2009, and there has been a spurt of writing. You can see Bradley's book, uh, and then Tamara Bray and Coimbra and Ian Hodder and Ruska. They've all emphasized how uh, deep into antiquity people were already considering a time before them, and it was being read by through artifacts at places where they had camped or they had newly moved to. And rock paintings have a way in particular of being superimposed over each other chronologically, so that any new group coming into an old painted area knows immediately of a time before. And it is another matter, as I've discussed in my new book, how that sense of time is actually handled and used in creation of images. So next slide, please. So the geographical theater for our discussion is this central part. These two valleys just above Satpura range is the Narmada River, flowing from Amarkantak in central India or Madhya Pradesh westwards into the Arabian Sea. It's about 1,200 kilometers long, and the Son River also has its origin and flows south of the Vindhyas eastwards and drains into the Ganges, and that's about 750 to 800 kilometers long. So there's a central basin that is carved by these twin valleys, and at least there was one paper 2 years, 3 years ago in Nature, in which Chris Clarkson argues that this is actually a route of migration for early hominins out of at least the modern humans out of Africa, and their dispersal into Southeast Asia and so on. But be that as it may, the entire Vindhyan range over there and the other ranges on the south are actually full of rock paintings, and there's a tremendous depth to the paintings in the sense that dwellings in these hills have been ongoing for thousands of years, from the Upper Paleolithic to the medieval times and even contemporary times. Their population living over there. So, what is the interaction between the hill dwelling populations and those urban centers within the valley? So, these are some of the issues. But we are dealing only with the extreme right hand side of the central range, which abuts into the Ganga plains. Next slide, please. And here's a Google Earth image of the study area. The brownish areas are the Vindhyan ranges abutting into the Ganga plains, and Varanasi is just upstream, about 200 kilometers from Patna. And the entire stretch is alluvial. But all of these ranges, going all the way up to Allahabad on the northern side and up to Jabalpur on this side and Jharkhand, is absolutely thick with rock paintings, as if any early population that was coming from Western India and going across the Ganga plains actually spread laterally too. And there is more concrete evidence of that. There are papers by Gudrun Corvinus talking about an Acheulean in the Nepal Tarai, and there's another one by Rakesh Tiwari, who also considers that there was some um, there were some tectonic movements in the Ganga basin. I think there's some recent study that there were tectonics over here, so that some of the older sites which were created during the Acheulean were actually covered by sediments, but they are exposed in the Nepal Tarai. So, and there is morphological similarity between the Acheulean found in the Nepal Tarai with those in the Son Valley. So that is the hypothesis that this is actually an early human migration corridor. And this is what makes the study of rock art as history important and interesting, because urbanization gets going in 6th century BC or around that time in the Ganga plains, and iron is discovered around 1500 BC, and the earliest sites like Raja Nal Ka Tila and Raipura are in the Vindhyan scarps. So their link with the early urbanism is very, very firm. And also bits of northern black polish ware are found in up on the scarp sites like Raipura. So the idea of the hypothesis of exchange of ideas between the two and their translation into rock paintings is one that is very interesting for us. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of rock paintings that we have collected. This is from our fieldwork starting 2009, and there's a whole bunch of sites here. On the extreme left top are some deer painted from the Lekhaiya Pahad site, which is rather famous from this region, from on top of the Vindhyan escarpment. The site was actually excavated, I think, in 1960s by Professor G.R. Sharma and his team. And a whole horde of 17 skeletons was actually found from human skeletons were found from this particular shelter. So there is solid ground over there for actually studying interrelationships between these 17 individuals, because bioarchaeological studies have been done on them by J.R. Lukács and others. But the symbolic data has been left aside. So the expression, I think, of kinship is going to be found probably more securely in the symbolic data rather than bioarchaeological one. And the second slide on top is from a Chunadari cave, which is a child drawn image of an elephant. And that is a cave site. I'll be showing some images of that. The slide on the extreme right top are some child drawings at the Morana Pahar cluster, which has been made famous by Dr. Bridget Olchin's paper on the subject in 1958, but also Dr. Olchin's study of Vindhyan agro-pastoral establishments, which is a study he made to explain the Deccan ash mounds at Brahmagiri, Utnur, Maski, and so on. So, agro-pastoralism or cattle keeping agriculturalists of Vindhyas are rather famous. And in the period of our own study, we have had a chance to interact with the many traditional cattle keepers who are still on these scarps practicing their subsistence and trying to see what symbolic systems they have and how they compare with these early paintings, which are found very near the contemporary cattle corrals, and whether or not this may be a product of some of the early pastoralists is a hypothesis that we are studying at the moment. So these are all then again from Morana Pahad, and on the extreme right is a group of human figures found in what we have termed Car 12 cave, and you can see some human figures of young adults dancing, probably with their flutes stuck in their waistband, and others are child-made images. Next, please. Next slide, please.
I've put, sir.
Sorry.
I've already put, sir.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And again, from Car 5 cave, we have some cattle images. Cattle images are very common in the scarp sites, and in many of them, actually, the cattle is being hunted. So we tend to think that must be the Mesolithic, and there are many cattle scenes. Even buffalo hunt scenes are there from about 200 shelters on the Morana escarpment, and the evidence for contemporary pastoralism with the ethnography is there from more recent times. The site that is in at the left bottom is actually Windham Falls. This is a site we discovered or we started work at first. It has been known to locals because there's a lot of graffiti already, and we had a uranium thorium date done from by Roman Banerjee, then a PhD student at Bristol. And if you see the calcium carbonate deposits on paintings, so two samples were taken by him, one beneath the painting and one above the painting, and respectively they yielded dates in the range of 12,000 BP and uh, around 10,000 BP. So that's between 8 and 10,000 BC. That some of the paintings at Windham are ascertained by the uranium thorium method. And this is a river, local river, that's the perspective from the Windham Falls rock art site. And there is cattle grazing in the vicinity. Next one, please. Yeah. And here is a painting from Morana Pahad of a man riding a buffalo. And this is the central region, of course. I think in the excavations of Langhanaj in Gujarat, the buffalo, the wild buffalo, has been found over there. And throughout the Madhya Pradesh belt, wild buffalo paintings and cattle paintings, of course, also there, but so also in the eastern extremities. And on the contemporary Vindhyan scarps, the buffalo pastoralists, who are actually the wealthiest, they have separate villages, and cattle and sheep and goat pastoralists, they have other village, separate villages. And this is an example of a upland water source. Although there are many waterfalls, so cattle grazers often spend the better part of the day near the gorges where more water is available. And this is probably a slide from the summer. Next, please. So I think the introduction is done. Now, this is broadly the structure of the talk. I'll first deal with some of the British archaeologists who worked in this area, then some of the Indian archaeologists, then ongoing. Well, this has already been introduced, so we'll just move on to the next slide. So, A.C. Carlyle was the first assistant uh, to Sir Alexander Cunningham, the first Surveyor General. Hello.
Can you hear us, Dr. Ajay Pratap? We couldn't hear you for a few minutes.
Yes, the lights have gone off, sir. So,
Okay, no, but we can hear you. So you're online, so you may continue with your
yeah,
talk.
sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir. So, A.C. Carlyle is actually credited with the first find of rock paintings in southern Uttar Pradesh. So, Mirzapur and Sonbhadra are the southernmost sort of districts of Uttar Pradesh. And this occasion he had when Alexander Cunningham was actually started his survey of Bundelkhand. And Carlyle actually examined the hills around Varanasi, and from a place called Sohagi Ghat, he found the first examples of painted caves. So the story actually began over there, and rather a lot of Indian prehistory was to be created through that find of Carlyle, because he also, along with finding paintings, he also found tiny tools, which are the geometric tools like lunates and crescents and trapezoids. I myself surveyed and found number of these in Rajmahal Hills. But in the mid 19th century, this was the first occasion when lunates, crescents, trapezoids, triangles, and other geometric types were actually found from in situ from painted caves, which also had uh, animal bones and residues of fire and so on and so forth. So Carlyle was actually trained as an archaeologist, and he thought that this was significant. But he actually sent his collection to Mr. Brown, J. A. Brown, in the USA, and proposed in his note to Brown that he thinks that these belong to a new time period, which is between the Neolithic and the Upper Paleolithic, because Upper Paleolithic tools are slightly bigger and Neolithic tools are of another kind, ground and polished, and so on. So these should be called as the Mesolithic, and he uses the term Mezolithic in his communication to Brown. And Brown wrote he was looking at similar tools from Africa and other parts, probably West Asia, and he wrote two papers, which I thought were the same. They were the same paper published twice or in two different places, in which he lays down the idea of a Mesolithic as a period distinctly between Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic, when transition from hunting to food production and coming in of new technologies takes place. There's also this paper by Wilson, which I've read, which is listed in my bibliography. But more importantly, the father, if you please, of new archaeology, Louis Binford, in his great work with his wife called New Perspectives in Archaeology, in which if you please, the manifesto of new archaeology or positivist archaeology or positivist archaeology or processual archaeology is laid down. That is the manifesto. In that particular thing, he wrote a foundational paper called Post Pleistocene Adaptations, i.e., what happens at the end of the last ice age when the Upper Paleolithic is beginning, or post Pleistocene, and the Holocene is about to also begin around 12,000 years ago. So, what is the notable changes that are happening in the environment and in human behavior and in technology? And he cites the example of A.C. Carlyle's finds, which I think make the prehistory of Mirzapur very notable, as well as the find of Carlyle, because his find is the only one cited at the top of the list of finds of the Mesolithic anywhere in the world. But it was even more important because he actually left for England after some time of serving Archaeological Survey of India, and his collection found its way to the great Albert Hall exhibition, science exhibition, great science exhibition of 1888, in which there's a long list of tools from Mirzapur which were displayed, and these were eventually acquired by different museums. British Museum got some, but also Manchester Museum. And some 3 years ago, there was a exhibition in Manchester, and they contacted us also for some photos of rock paintings over here, and you can see that on the internet. Carlyle's work continues to be celebrated. So all the artifacts he collected, some are there in Manchester or in the British Museum. Now, um, his paper itself on the rock paintings called Notes on Lately Discovered Sepulchral Mounds, Cairns, Caves, Cave Paintings, Stone Implements. I looked for it myself at the Asiatic Society of Bengal Library at Kolkata. And that particular volume where it is supposed to be printed has a notice saying this will be printed later, and the rest of the paper is not there. But excerpts from it were actually published much later, probably 1909 by Vincent Smith, and after that by Panchanan Mitra in The Personality of India. And there are many other places that actually reproduce what Carlyle wanted to say about his collection. So maybe go to the next slide, please. Right. So this I have covered again. Uh, Maybe go to the next one, please. Right. The other notable British archaeologist of this area is actually somebody called John Cockburn. Now, Cockburn actually lived in Varanasi, as Carlyle did not. He was here on official duty, and along with Sir Cunningham, he actually went to Gorakhpur, and all those notes that everybody knows about, all those publications that came from their travels along the route taken by Huansang. Now, John Cockburn was the opium officer of Varanasi, and as per my reading, he was a close friend of Maharaja of Banaras too. I think he probably used to go for tiger shoots and so on at that time, and he used to roam around extensively in all the forests of the Maharaja of Banaras, which extend from Mirzapur, which is Sonbhadra district is the old Mirzapur. Actually, it was carved out from Mirzapur in I think 1978, and it is a huge district of some 12,000 square miles or kilometers, and Bhanda also, which is where Cockburn's sort of exploits took place in terms of antiquarian finds. But among his finds, he also found Paleolithic sites, and one description of his which deals with rhino skeleton studded with microlithic implements lodged by projectiles fired, and some other dead animals around it, like the nilgai or Vosilaphus tragocamillus, and the two types of sus, that actually Sus salvanius and Sus scrofa, that's the wild pig that is typical of this area, were also found by Cockburn. And his contribution above that of Carlyle is in actually publishing the rock art and archaeological corpus of southern Uttar Pradesh. And I provided a extensive bibliography of his later on in this presentation, as in my other publications. May we go to the next one, please? Right. So there's been a lot of post-independence work starting in the 1980s, with the exception of Ghosh's report, which was written in 1932. This is the prehistoric antiquities of Mirzapur. Now, Ghosh was a Rai Sahib Manoranjan Ghosh was a keeper of the Patna Museum, and in 1932 he took an elephant journey from Patna to Chhattisgarh, where he found the famous rock painted caves. From there, he crossed the Son River and came into Mirzapur. And his photographs become the first photographs ever of of rock art and inscriptions in Brahmi and Shankha and forts of the region and several other things. His photographs become the very first, and his report was published by Archaeological Survey of India. I bought my own copy some years ago, so it's still available, and it's very interesting for anybody wishing to work on this area. Then in 1980s started Professor G.R. Sharma's great work, which was a trailblazing piece of work and so many very important publications with which we are largely familiar. I mean, the finding of the Acheulean sites and Middle Paleolithic sites and Upper Paleolithic sites and Mesolithic sites and Neolithic sites, all in Son Valley and in Belan Valley, and that entire work at Koldiva and Mahagara and Mahadaha and all these sites was actually done in Professor G.R. Sharma's time. But in follow-up, the work, the contributions of Professor J. N. Pal are the most outstanding, and Professor V. D. Mishra. And their book listed over here, Mesolithic India, Mishra and Pal 2002, is a very famous work, which is almost an encyclopedia of early sites and faunal remains and so on of the area. Mesolithic India, which is by Professor V. D. Mishra and J. N. Pal. Professor Vidula Jaiswal excavated a site called Haria D in 1980s and came up with these non-geometric and geometric microliths inside a rock shelter. And she thought that habitation there must have started at uh, in the Upper Paleolithic, and indeed some of the paintings over there. Now, if we look at the dates of paintings in Indonesia and other places, I think it should not be surprising, but there is a complete absence of accurate dating at this point of time in the Vindhyas. Direct dating of the paintings themselves, which is very regrettable, but hopefully it will happen in the future. And then we have the work by Dr. Rakesh Tiwari in 1990, Rock Art of Mirzapur. And that was a wonderful survey of all the sites and a reproduction in high quality photo plates of the paintings and a small statistical account of how many painted rock shelters are there. I think in this regard, this is the very first work in Mirzapur. Uh, and thereafter, in 2012, uh, Dr. R.K. Verma, who actually excavated as part of Dr. G.R. Sharma's team, he excavated Bagai Khor another famous site along with Morana Pahad, because it's on the same escarpment. Likhaiya Pahad, Bagai Khor, and Morana Pahad, they are in one cluster. There are many other sites which we haven't discovered either. So there must be upwards of 200 painted shelters on the escarpment, and that's a lot of data to handle for any single project. So that work remains, and I hope that some of you will be interested to take that work future, and we shall be very glad to help. But archaeogenetics has emerged meanwhile, and our own Professor Gyaneshwar Chaube at this university, and Sachin Tiwari and others, they are looking at how to correlate bioarchaeological specimens from various parts of the country and the subcontinent. But since the skeletal material on the Morana escarpment is established, and even if its DNA has depleted, either new techniques would be found to extract DNA, or new excavations would be held, as Professor Jainpal rightly suggested. He says just excavate and take new samples and then do your genetic studies from that. So we'll be able to correlate then which way migrations happen and what are the relationships between the central Vindhyan populations and Ganga Valley populations as a case. Of course, greater distance population could also be correlated in this way. And amongst the projects ongoing, I might mention, since I've read them, I've enjoyed the work of Vikas Kumar Singh, who has also contributed to the study of rock art, Professor Prabhakar Upadhyay and Swatant Singh of the Archaeology Department, and Sachin Tiwari of Archaeology Department also. They have worked extensively in the Kaimur ranges from here until Gaya and so on, and the whole area is full of rock paintings. It's a bit like our own mini fertile crescent, if you please, starting from Koldiva and going all the way up to Gaya, but in other directions also possibly, where early human habitation, Stone Age habitation, coming up to Mesolithic and rock paintings, and subsequently lead into agricultural origins. So this area is very rich in this kind of material for research, and it is open. Next, please. So far, distribution of our own sites is concerned, I assume I've given some idea of the chronology of the paintings, but we should await precise dates, because only that is the ultimate arbiter. So, coming out of Varanasi, if one heads south or southeast or south southwest, in all directions, the Vindhyan ranges are present, and almost all the places that have been mentioned in the literature as having significance are actually located in this particular area. But of course, towards Siddhi and Riva and onwards, the business of rock paintings continue. Next, please. May I have the next slide, please? Talking about the types of art. Now, there are especially the sites resolve themselves into those on the flat upland scarps. Then there are several rivers. The rainfall actually creates its own channels, and there are many gorges and waterfalls in upland Vindhyas, and most of them have these caves or deep shelters which were inhabited, and there are rock painting sites inside them, but also isolated hilltops, such as our site called Panchmukhi and Kandakot. They're actually hills on top of the scarps, and after a bit of climb, one can see that there is paintings up there also. So this is one classification in terms of the location, geographical location in
நெட்டே வரமாட்டேங்குதுடா இதுல காதே கேட்க மாட்டேங்குதுடா அன்ஸ்டேபிள் அன்ஸ்டேபிள் வருது என்ன பண்ணே தெரியல இப்ப இதுல கேட்டு இருக்கேன் என்னன்னே புரியல இதுலயும் வர மாட்டேங்குது ஃபீட் எடுத்துட்டா என்னடா போய்டா
So 1 minute, I think there's some problem.
Okay,
I'll just go back and correct it. So 1 minute.
sure.
I think, is it okay, sir? Hello?
No, yeah, types of
Next
art.
slide.
Yes, yes, that's fine.
No, this is the one, no, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that is the geography of the rock shelters, but the paintings themselves may also be classified in terms of size. And the largest panels of several meters square is inside or outside the bigger caves in the rocky gorges. The medium sized paintings are most common, and they are from 15 centimeters to in width to about 1 to 2 meters in length in terms of complexity of the composition. And they are usually inside residential shelters, which also typically have paved floors and in some cases soot marks also on the ceiling. And it is thus that we can call them residential, because the paving, the floor is the main indicator. We have not been able to excavate any of them, so there is no other parameter. Now, the density of the painting is also the highest in the quote unquote residential shelters. But there's a third category of paintings which are extremely minuscule. They are about 5 centimeters or so, up to 5 to 15 centimeters square in total size. And they seem to have been made very laboriously with quills and other kinds of contact material. And they are at very low heights, where they almost cling to the floor as if some very young person or a child actually made them. And finally, there is one category which are clearly, I think, once you look at the slides, you'll be able to judge it by yourself, which I think in children's hideouts, which are very constricted, narrow, gallery like spaces where uh, kids living in shelters would actually, hide away and play during the day and so on. So, next, please. And there's also a subject-wise classification in terms of animal figures, which includes encyclopedic sort of rendering of the local types of fauna. The ones we have recorded are fish, turtles, spotted deer, sambar, chausinga, that is the Gazella benetti, I think, and then black buck and blue bull and birds, elephant, rhino, Indian cattle, water buffaloes, monkey, monitor, lizard, and felines of various kinds. Then human figures again show a whole range, and the direct depiction of children and females is a lot less than that of adult males, but they are there. Then a lot of design paintings are there, particularly on Morana Pahad and the older and long-term inhabited locations. These include cross hatchings and wavy lines and walls and complex designs and basic geometric shapes also. Then there are drawings of artifacts. Some of the earliest panels, which again I should be able to show, which is elephant hunts and so on, they actually show handheld spears and long spears and bows and arrows. And then later paintings have wooden traps, rope traps, mast traps of acacia thorns, lassos, long spears, short spears, and so on. But when we come to the medieval rock paintings, then the artifactual or body adornments increase, as it were, trying to establish the chronology of that particular. This is from the artist's mind, to create a chronology for his depiction through the iconography and the material artifacts that are worked into the iconography. So we can tell very clearly the medieval painting from early historic and the prehistoric from that. There's also a whole range of transport that is depicted in the rock paintings, because Morana Pahad has the Riva Highway going, or it's an old road called the Deccan Road, Old Deccan Road, from Damanganj to Riva, and there are rock shelters on either sides. So they have palkis and bangis and bullock carts and horse buggies and even camel carts. and a small number of trees, crops, and pottery and textile and hand imprints are also found. Next, please. Recently, some work, very interesting work, I think, in the last decade, has been outstanding in terms of trying to identify who actually drew these figures, whether they were males or females, whether they were old people, whether they were young adults, or whether they were children. And I think virtually, as per the procedure followed, which is to actually measure the width of the fluting. If the finger has been used to paint, then it's called the finger flute, and the width of the or in the palm impressions, particularly the width of the finger allows us to infer the age of the individual, and often gender too, in terms of the uh, range of measurements in that category. So the work by Liliana Yannick in Norway and Scandinavia, and by April Nowell in Western Europe, the classic European Upper Paleolithic sites, has been pathbreaking in this regard. And I've read about 5 articles by each of them, and they are outstanding in their merit in identifying young persons' drawings from those by older individuals. But drawings by women and drawings of women were also the subject as early as 2004, the subject of analysis by Hayes Gilpin. And this book is very famous. It's in my bibliography. I bought a copy as well, on how to identify gender in rock paintings. So there's complex social information, as we were discussing at the beginning of this talk, that is to be derived, that which may not be available from non-symbolic sources. And finally, young adults. The bioarchaeological data from Ganga Valley and from the Vindhyan Highlands suggests that there were more young adults in the population than there were older or younger sort of individuals at any given point of time. So there has to be a certain or a large proportion of rock art made by young adults, particularly the ones that are at great heights, at Windham Falls and at Bukhadari. These paintings are significantly high up on the cliffs, as would be impossible for a younger artist to draw. Next, please. Yeah. And some of the storytelling that rock art has, and there's a lot of that in the Eastern Vindhyan Ranges, is the subject of great analysis, very interesting analysis the world over, as to what is the purpose of these stories. Is it simply painting something out of fantasy? Did it actually happen and it was recorded? And if it was recorded, then what would be the significance of that? So there are usually these narratives, when they are painted, they are almost standalone, although the rock surface remains the same from the time that particular group arrived and the time that the spot was used by some earlier group. So paintings don't go away, but compositions try to create some distance between earlier ones and so on. So uh, the narratives can be identified almost immediately. So as we go, the various types of narratives in this section are explained through the slides. Next, please. May I have the next slide, please?
Can you see it, sir?
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So this is a depiction of a school of fish high up on a cliff. I had Professor Pat Chauhan with me when we went to look at this site, and he had a laser meter, so for measuring distances. So we actually measured this particular composition. So between 12 and 16 feet high on a vertical cliff, and there's a wonderful sort of school of fish painted up there. Next, please. This site, I forgot to say, this site is actually on the Belan River. Now, Belan is the river that flows next to Koldihwa, and that is the valley part of the Belan River, where it has a silty landscape around it. But it actually originates in the Vindhyan Ranges, much as other rivers of the region, like Karamnasa and Garai and Adwa, and all of them have archaeological sites of great value next to them. And this is in the old channel of the Belan, this particular site. And in this particular uh, set of narratives, it actually took us about 10 years to follow what was happening. We used to think this is a row of dancers, but gradually it dawned that these are actually turtles or tortoises over here. And there are swimmers, human shape, next to each of them. So between two tortoises, there's a human figure, and he's holding a bow and arrow and trying to shoot the turtle. So there's a whole sequence of turtle, human, turtle, human, turtle, human, like that, with beautiful sort of designs inside them. And just above that, there is another narrative which has been silted under by calcium carbonate, and the region is very rich in this kind of deposits, and maybe because of the underlying limestones. And here's a couple of female figures, human female figures, kneeling in front of what looks like a Bos indicus bull, and more fish to the left, and deer. Next, please. May we have the next slide, please?
Sir, I have put the next slide. You can't see it?
No, I don't see that it has changed. I
Yeah,
can
it has
see.
changed a male deer
Yeah.
followed by
Yeah. So this is
Uh,
still at Mukhadari, and here's a whole series of deer
Can you see
painted.
the next one?
Yeah. The next one, please, madam. And to the right side of this panel, we've called them MKD1 and MKD2, is what looks like later painting. The left side of the rock face is full of wild, if you please, fauna. And to the right, there's something that suggests a later chronological bracket, because the painting seeks to associate humans and cattle in a sense of domestication, or in a non-hunting sort of encounter. So this is very interesting from the middle course of the Benin Valley, the rocky part. And at the bottom again, it's very interesting that there's a whole design box kind of thing. At many sites, this is found that if the painter has to climb, exert himself unduly, then they have their own set of designs over there ready-made, which can be used in painting, or at least at this site. This is very outstanding. Next, please. Another narrative that has taken us considerably long in terms of understanding the various layers in it and significances, and sometimes at the risk of reading too much. But this particular painting is at the exit part of the Likhania Dari rock art site, which is the closest to Varanasi. It's about 35 kilometers and takes about an hour by vehicle from here. And it's a beautiful waterfall come river valley, not very high. The Osadan. And in this particular panel, you can see that some deer are being trapped in in a in a set of traps made at the mouth of the valley, from where the deer would try to exit. And these we ascertain through ethnographic literature. There's actually a mention in Crook's account, Castes and Tribes of Northwest Provinces, that there's a particular tribe here called Baheria, and they drive the deer into a valley that is V-shaped, and one end of it is closed because that side is the waterfall. So the entry part is then closed with acacia thorns and so on, and then the deer are stampeded into the various traps and caught. But it is usually the smaller deer, like black buck, that is trapped in en masse in this sort of way. So we think this particular design, which took us a great deal of time trying to understand what it actually depicts, and there are some human figures in it as well. So you can see this is actually a mass trapping scene. There's one human figure here and one on top over here. This is two, and this is a later drawing, but this one is actually a petroglyph. This must come later, I suppose. And it can even be a female figure looking at the hairstyle, because females are depicted with buns, and that's a distinguishing iconographic trait. So this is a petroglyph here that has been gouged out from the sandstone over here, and here are black buck or maybe gazelle, and these are the various sort of traps over here, and they are being shown. Now this is the kind of description that's actually given in Crook's account of 1896, in which he talks about children and women going to the prairies, quote unquote, and driving deer into. So here I would like to mention that I've also read about half a dozen papers of uh, this type of deer traps in the Central and West Asian context involving the same type of deer, which is the Gazella benneti or Gazella gazella, and small deer or black buck. And of course, they also use mountain valleys, but not just mountain valleys. There are other types of uh, traps that are stone circles and so on, in which hundreds of deer can be stampeded. And I've heard some presentations also by people who use remote sensing to actually study these trap formations in West and Central Asia. But the enigma is that there are no deer bones that are actually found in the great numbers that one would expect if this is a mass trap. But then, having looked at one specimen of a black buck antler dagger in the Lucknow Museum, which was a favorite of one of the Nawabs over there, one tends to think that if so many deer are being caught, they are probably just being traded by indigenous communities in exchange for what they require. And would explain why no significant faunal accumulation happens as a byproduct of this activity. But nevertheless, this qualifies in what my colleague Dr. Gaganpreet Singh at this Department of History calls manuals. That actually traditional knowledge is manualized or given the character of an instructional sort of form, so that it can be learned by generations. So these drawings and paintings are knowledge based, and they are not so innocuous. They actually carry a lot of information. The location of this painting is at the exact spot where the trap has to be built, but the deer has to be stampeded in first, and so on. So this is a unique aspect of Vindhyan rock paintings. Next, please. Next, please. Ah, so this is a shelter called Car 14, and this is probably campfires are these radiating lines. So this is a particular painting. First of all, this is a superimposition, and there's an iron sword. Oh, it's going back and forth, madam. I want the next slide.
Sir, I'm having some net problem. It is going back and forth
Ah,
on its own. Yeah, I think
okay.
you can see the thing now. You'll have to bear with me a little. The net is a little unstable, so it is going back and forth on its own.
You're having power problems there as well?
No power. Net itself is unstable, so it's not transferring so quickly. And now you can see the slide, no?
Yes, madam. Very clear. Thank you. Very high quality images as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
now here is a superimposition. I was talking about how those who are painting are also, imbued with a historical sense or passage of time or a sense of chronology, which you would say is a common sense statement because, after all, humans know. Then why don't we say that the residues created by them are imbued with a time sense? Where is the problem in that, if not in some kind of, historical bias that people who lived in forest did not have a historical sense because they were not part of our history, which would be nonsense because that is not admissible at all. So in this particular example, we can see that there is a elephant which was painted with a different yellow ochre, and in fact, the whole image shows that there are a group of people surrounding this particular elephant. There's a calf next to it, a small one, and they all are holding spears. So this elephant probably bumbled up on top of the escarpment from the Son Valley and got hunted over there. And there's a huge cave where this painting exists. But then again, at a much later time, this particular gentleman, who this is self-image actually, I venture to say, because there's another image of this gentleman done in exact same style, holding a shield and a sword. In his The sword is in his left hand, and the shield is in his right, which makes him a lefty probably. So a ditto image exists in the Lekhaiya Pahad cave excavated by uh, Allahabad University. So there's a double image of this man. He was probably the expert rock painter over there. And this particular cave, this is outside the cave, but inside this cave, there are over 100 handprints in black. And it seems there was a huge congregation here of elders and the young adults and even children, and they all left their handprints. And there are small flecks of white paintings over here. So children were practicing painting around this masterful execution. So it's possible that those handprints date from the time this particular painting was made. And there are other smaller paintings here. You can see this bull image, and somebody is actually hunting this thing over here. Next, please. So, child drawings, designs, squiggles, animals. This is something it has been a great pleasure to actually try and focus upon and to document. And I think the images themselves will speak. Maybe just go to the images, please. So, this is a small film. Can you play the film, madam?
Sir, I'm afraid you've not inserted the video, you've only inserted the picture.
No, it was an inserted video. I could play it. Maybe if you reduce the size
No,
of
sir.
this thing, that thing will be visible.
No, sir, it's not 1 minute.
Okay, then we move to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
If you don't
Can
mind.
you see that? Yeah.
Now, this is from Wyndham Falls, and this is an old calcite.
You check this and you move on.
Yeah, please see if you can make the video play.
It's
Um,
wrong with wide.
Now, this is from the Wyndham Falls site, and this is the layer that has been sampled by Roman Banerjee. He is now an assistant professor at University of Pondicherry. I think this spot particularly, which yields around, uh, around 8,000 BC date over here from the uranium thorium sampling, and it is actually full of child drawn geometric designs. I have a enhanced image of this somewhere, but I couldn't find it right away. So you'll just have to see a reproduction of it on one of my other papers, which are on my academia site. But calcites were chosen for painting for the contrast that they provided, and the red ochre of ferric oxide uh, stands out distinctly in these paintings. And the height of this thing from the floor is another indicator that it had to be a youngster, a child actually, who could actually sit and do these drawings over here. Next, please. There are some direct depictions of children also. This is another panel to the left of this particular site called Windham 4.1 or rather 4.2, and there is a exquisite scene over there that has been painted, a whole narrative. And this is a hut to the extreme right of this painting. There's a hut and a young individual child over here, right there, amongst women who are sitting on the floor. But it'll be more evident, and one old person here sitting outside the hut. It'll be more evident from following slides. Next, please. Also from Windham Falls site, de-stretched one particular area when there are only squiggles, and this does not resolve itself into any kind of figure as such. So just drawing board sort of practice, uh, painting practice uh, is suspected here. May we have the next slide, please? Next one, please. Right. And again in Sonbhadra, there's a hill called Panchmukhi Hill with modern Shiva temple there, in which the deity is an old classical sort of sculpture, piece of sculpture uh, from a 10th century temple that existed on the same promontory, but gradually got dismantled and all the bits went away, except the sculptures which are still now protected by the ASI. There's a blue board there, and just below the promontory, there are a number of caves, 5 caves over there with paintings. Now I have a photo of the full shelter over here, and this seems to have been definitely, the work of not one but several children, and over a long period of time. You can see the hand stencils here are of young individuals, just as these drawings, which would come very naturally, as cognitive psychologists would say, to children. But Cockburn called this. This is in Rom Paragana, and he wrote a paper in which he mentioned this cave as the symbol cave. And here is a self-image or image of a child right in the middle of this panel. Maybe I have the next one then. Maybe have the next slide. And more drawings from the same cave. It is possible some of the older children actually drew the younger ones. You can see monkey-like figures here. They're actually children wearing earrings. And on the right hand side here again, there is a child whose image has been drawn. And along with it, some drawing practice of curvilinear. So, some people say it's actually Brahmi-like characters over here. And indeed, there is one inscription, but that is a Shankha Lipi translated by Professor Srinivasan, T.R. Srinivasan. And that mentions the name Tatchaka, who's probably an official inscriber at the old 10th century temple over there. There's also a engraved Shankha Lipi written by some donor to that temple. So there is writing, examples of writing inside the shelter and outside the shelter. But to me, these look like just designs drawn by children. Next, please. This is the shelter, and from which all these paintings that we saw in the last 2 or 3 slides, children's drawing. And there's a place over here where uh, kids can sit and play, and the temple, etc., is on top of the promontory, but that's much later. This is a prehistoric sort of pastoral sort of haunt, and the paintings in 5 different locations. And that video, if it could work, it could show you how there are very interesting paintings in places where only a child's hand could extend itself, not an adult's. So, and very interesting. Next, please. Maybe have the next slide, please. This is slightly older children. There's more coordination in these paintings than some of the basic geometric patterns. But owing to the fact that these are in very constricted spaces, you can see a couple of lizards over here and a deer with an arrow stuck in its throat, and there are some very design oriented drawings, and all drawn at very impossible sort of angles by extending the hand inside nooks and corners and turning the, the stylus or the brush upwards and painting, which only a child can accomplish. But this is probably a child of 8 to 12 years of age to be able to do this. Next, please. Windham Falls 2, in the last season last year, we found one uh, sort of corner of the site which was covered by vegetation, and therefore we could not look at it, with just the sort of hideout that children would sort of use for play during the day. And a nice painting over here of a procession. There's a horse over here and two or three people, and there's even something like a tree behind it. And there are many faded paintings which can be revealed by the stretch inside it. So it was used over a long period of time, and it is next to Wyndham Falls side 3.3 and 4. Between them, there's this sort of hideout kind of space. Next, please. These are paintings by older sort of individuals. One, both show cattle or buffaloes being hunted. In the top image, the spear is thrust inside the chest, and in the other one, somebody has brought down a whole big bull or buffalo with just one arrow. So that is some young adults drawing. Next, please. Now we hypothesize, we suggest strongly that the child hypothesis has to be considered for the origin of a particular type of rock art, which we have done away with by calling it abstract rock art, because clearly you can see there's a lot of drawings that look like geometric, for the sake. But it's not geometry for geometry's sake. It's not even art for art's sake. It is actually product of child's play, and that would make a important consideration in the selection of spots for settlement, even among say 200 shelters on the Morana escarpment. Now, this view is from the Morana escarpment, and this is one locality of 4 or 5 shelters that were inhabited at a time, in which the central shelter with a cave like sort of opening seems to have been the basic residence. It is full of child paintings on the ceiling, but more mature, like the painting of the cattle that I showed at the beginning of the talk. And these shelters, which need some climbing up there, are full of immature paintings. Now, these were the play spots for kids during the day. And there's a larger area around it where there are kids paintings such as that of a goat and so on, also shown at the beginning. So the answer to the question why some shelters have paintings in them and others don't, is that the others which don't have are individual shelters with no attached sort of play spaces, as it were, as those that have paintings. So that is one possible resolution. Next, please. Madam, may we have the next slide? Now, what about gender, and what obtains in the Eastern Vindhyan Ranges in terms of gender drawings? May we have the next slide, please? So this is something very new and very unusual. There's a site on Morana Pahad where our good friend uh, Shyam Jalam Dubey has his farms, and he knows all the sites in the region, and we wouldn't have been able to find a single one without his help. So he took us to this spot, and it is a it is a fountain-like thing where there is a water spot with two or three rock shelters, and this beautiful painting, rock painting, exists over there of a hennaed hand. So we think that this is a gendered sort of drawing representing a female presence over here. Next, please. These are from Wyndham Falls, where the geometric shape has been used for drawing uh, male and female figures. And this one on the extreme right, on the left hand side, is a female figure because she's got a hair bun and earrings are also shown. So, if this is contemporary with the paintings on the calcites below, then these would be Mesolithic, and the use of body adornments seems to be proven by this particular painting. As the depiction of a female form also attaches a great deal more importance and to within rock art. Next, please. Okay. Now, this is from Khadi Pahadi on Morana Pahad. I keep going from one side to the other to show you what kind of kinship or sort of gendering particular types of images have. And this particular shelter is full of microliths. I'm again over here thankful to my friend Jose Rafael, who came with us on this field trip. And here are two female figures. One is a child and one is older. They are wearing dresses. I discovered an article by Mr. Gilligan, Professor Gilligan from one Australian university, who has been working on the origin of clothing, and he thinks it should start at Middle Pleistocene or the middle of the last ice age, and particularly in temperate regions where, because the body cannot withstand cold, it can withstand heat to a larger degree, but it is the cold climes that make. But most of the female drawings in or drawings of the feminine gender are shown clothes, and that is one of the type markers of gender in Eastern Vindhyan regions. So they are probably sisters or mother and daughter, whose kinship is also demonstrated inside the cave uh, habitation area. Next, please. This is from Morana Pahad, where again some five or more, it's a very faded part of the shelter, are female figures who are dancing or playing. This is also from a fieldwork last year. So next, please. And the same artist who drew that one drew this image, because you can see the stylistics are very much in common between the last panel and this one, the narrative scene. And this one seems to have a tree over here and some people playing around it. And this was no doubt a scene they saw on the Deccan Road. So this painting might even be medieval or early historic, as the case may be. Next, please. Now, family and kinships in residential shelter. I must say, this is tremendously exciting. I've been reading a lot about prehistoric kinships, and Ensor's book in particular seems to be full of promise, because kinship relations are the sort of the nucleus of families and maintenance of families and child rearing in the South Asian context. So there are so many shelters that have depictions of families and kinships in the Eastern Vindhyan region. Next, please. So this is one shelter called Kalsahwa, which again we documented last year. And you can see the flooring over here and paintings over here and some soot on the ceiling. And there's a very lovely painting of a family, a most unusual and unique one, right next to this habitation shelter. Next, please. Maybe have the next slide, please. Right. So you can see in this one that uh, there's probably one, although the dresses are similar, but uh, the distinction between one and the other has been made by these horizontal lines. And so the one might be a male figure or it might not. And there was one female figure and a girl child in between. There's possibility another child over here. But this is a unique and stunning sort of piece that we came across after 10 years of work. It started in 2009, and this particular panel comes to us in 2023. So there are the rewards for doing project work and research on this subject. Next, please. This is from the Panchmukhi Hill, where those, which is the geometric, the squares and the knots and crosses kind of drawings were there. On the right hand side of the shelter, there's a protrusion over here, and three female figures, or at least two of them are female. One could be a male one. There's a peacock over here. There's a horse painted with whole patterns here, and has got a long tail and a pot kind of thing painted here. But um, the presence of these female figures over here is very interesting, next to a shelter, almost as if. Now there's another cave next to it, and there's three more, total five caves over there. So there could have been nearly four families at least existing on the Panchmukhi uh, promontory, and women are depicted exactly like this in the eastern region. Uh, in the Likhaniadari deer hunt scene too, the female figures have got their arms up like that, and hair buns and so on. So, children's drawings on the left hand side of this cave, and attending aunts or mothers or sisters on this side. Next, please. This is just an enhanced image of the one that so very happy kind of image, and therefore definitely representative of kinship, and securely the image of a child and an elder woman over here. Next one. And now this comes from Likhaiya Pahad, the shelter excavated by Allahabad University. This is a hunt scene. This man has a bow and arrow in his right hand. On the left side, he's got a barge pole with some animal tied, which is on the left shoulder of the what seems to be an adolescent in front. They're carrying back this animal from the kill. And there's a female figure up here who she may have been part of the hunt, and they're coming back into the Lekhaya Pahad shelter. This large band seems to have lived in Lekhaya shelter with 17 skeletons found over there of children and young adult and older adults between 40 and 45, and one around 50 years old. But also females are found inside the shelter. And in two cases, I think J.R. Lukacs reported parry fractures on thigh and on the arm of one or two separate females, which he thought represented domestic violence. There could be food scarcity or something. And so rock art plays a particular role even in the time uh, it is created, and it fits very well with Merlin Donald's model of the theoretic stage of intelligence or mythic stage, which comes before the theoretic stage, where ideologies, artifacts are used to sort of construct ideologies for social control. So there are many people, even Romans' work has been about society and social control and the role of rock art in it. So we can think about this image from many points of view, but minimally that there is a family over there, and there may be some value attached to such depictions. Next, please. And this is a one also found last year, and there are two men standing face to face with bows and arrows, and this one seems to be coming back from a hunt. This is from the car 5 shelter in the group that I showed you, with the high shelter where children go up and play. And here's a child over here drawn in on the left side of the man on the right, and there's a dog that seems to be following, or this could be a rabbit, perhaps, that he hunted. Uh, but 4 feet over here suggests there's probably a dog. Is that right? Oh, could be a rabbit. Yes. Okay. Next, please. There's a lot of rabbits up there on the escarpment. And this masterpiece, uh, called by Antiquity, which first published these images in 2009 as the arrow crossfire panel or arrow crossfire scene. This, my student, Dr. Naval Kumar, and I, we stumbled across in our first survey at the Windham Falls. And I've never seen anything like this after such finesse, but this in, in the way the arrows have been depicted. So think that there are women inside the hut and children from the hairstyles like that, and an old person at the back of the hut, and some crops are being protected. Now I've shown you the close-up first. See the larger panel. Next, it seems to be recording some real event that actually happened of a conflict. Oh, the same one. And the next one, please. So this is definitely some local crop that is stored inside the hut. I've seen Pahadia cultivators in Santhal Pargana, they store their maize and millets by tying them to the roof posts. So there's probably millets as well and maize which have grown extensively in the ranges as well. So this seems to be a case of preserving memories of some kinds of events, which lends itself uh, to the idea that people in the past also had a sense of time before them and of salient events in their own lives, and often painted them to commit those things to long-term memory by creating these records. Now, maybe have the next slide. And crowds are shown. So if there are five shelter groups that are inhabited on Morana Pahad, is there an occasional get together? Is there a supra family? So the evidence seems to suggest, and in this one there are about 21 humans. Now this is a very common motif. This is used in many parts of India for depicting group dances and so on. So this is from Windham. Next, please. And again a crowd again in the arrow crossfire scene. On the left hand side there's a man with a headdress, and they are all carrying swords, and they are attacking, in the process of attacking these residents next to the waterfalls. And there's a animation which is very unique in Vindhyan rock art. There's a lot of animation, and often the images are loaded with emotions, as this one indeed seems to express, fear and anger and so on. And there are only two archers actually. This one is a repetition on this side. There's a figure of eight drawing from earlier on of two conjoined triangles, and arrows are flying in the air. Some paint has leaked while painting over here. And on the left hand side, there are six or seven individuals who are trying to kill them, basically. So this photo was published by Antiquity in 2010 as the arrow crossfire panel. And on the right hand side, you can see female figures, one sitting on the floor and one standing up. There's a adolescent child next to it. There's the corn over here, and some old individual sitting at the back of the hut. One child outside, and one older adult and two younger adults firing arrows at the intruders. Next, please. And this is a narrative panel from Likhania Dari site, which we spoke about a little bit at the beginning. And the structure of the valley, this is where the deer hunt painting exists on this particular surface itself. But this is a medieval composition, and again, it took rather a lot of time to understand, although very clearly the way it has been executed, both the luxury with which paint has been applied, in none of the other compositions so much paint has been consumed, and the the sort of stylistic difference between depiction of elephants like this and in other. Then there's a whole series of horses which are not local horses at all. They are more like Arabian horses, steed, largish in size, and the riders on them, they are wearing helmets of some kind and carrying curved swords and shield, which are very different from other other depictions. And there are some regular soldiers depicted holding bows and arrows and swords. And the indigenous people, there's, a, actually a hunting party in which these soldiers are trying to capture a wild elephant, which is in front. So this is at the beginning of the valley itself as we enter from this direction. And this scene is also shown going into the valley from the correct direction. It is not painted opposite or topsy-turvy or anything. It recognizes and takes cognition of the true direction of the particular event, and therefore it seems to have some historicity to it. And there are some stupas from the early historic period over here. This is the Garai River Valley. This is the shelter. There's a medieval bridge over here at the beginning. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a front view of this multi-period panel. The deer hunt scene that I showed you in an enlarged version is to the right over here, and the size of the figures is relatively very small. And there's a whole design pattern over here, which may be read as thorny bushes. The whole place is teeming with acacia trees, which are incidentally used by pastoralists also to safeguard their cattle stations from leopards and so on. Acacia thorns are laid out around the cattle corrals, especially at night, so that the leopard don't come in. And this is an older color. The color itself belies that this is much older. There's the petroglyph human figure is over here. So this could be Neolithic, possibly. And although the petroglyph would be slightly later. And then here are some Hakawalas driving away a leopard and a tiger, which are the indigenous, the people who actually painted this panel. So we were perplexed from where they got this idea. Where did they see this scene? There are paintings of palkis that you have seen, so that it is easy to say it must have been on the road in front of them. So was this also in the road in front of them? And where do these two stupas come from? There's actually a place called Chunar nearby, and there's a particular hill called Gurupur, which has drawings, Buddhist rock art over there. So there are drawings of Buddha and so on. And this was on the pilgrimage route from Bodh Gaya to Kaushambi and Bodh Gaya to Sarnath. So you have to basically come from Gaya and you cross the Son River at Chopan, and then you climb the escarpment up to Robertsganj, and then you walk up to Aurora. Now, Aurora is a place where Ashokan inscription, the Minor Rock Edict 1 is located. There's one in Sasaram, and there are 17 others elsewhere within the country. So this is an old trade route and also pilgrimage route where Likhania Dari sits exactly on this particular route. So there would have been some Buddhist traffic in the early part, and there are two stupas over here. And this was a painting much later, made in reaction, I suppose, to this one. It seems to respond, but there are many cases of that. And here are the details of the two stupa-like characters. So this looks like a Kushana stupa, what have you, and this one too. And here are these small, intriguing paintings next to these two stupas. And here's the design. Yeah, and a kilometer or two upstream, on in the same valley, you can see the same valley end over there. There's a second cave called Chunadari because there's too much calcium carbonate deposited inside it. So probably the locals used to remove some of that to eat with their pan. So Chunadari. Dari is from the Persian Darra, which is a gorge. So this particular very large cave with paintings all over, all outside over here and inside. But this is a regular picnic spot and it has been defaced uh, immeasurably. So let's have a look at it. There's a very intriguing painting inside in the back wall, absolute back wall of this cave. Right here, you can see on the top left slide, it is barely paintable, but somebody sat there very patiently, chose the spot where calcium carbonate exists and painted, which under enhancement we could see is the narrative of the return of this same hunting party, done in a stylistically different way than the other panel, in which they're coming back with 4 elephants and other wild animals they have caught, and all the soldiers are shown marching. Next slide, please. So this is part of the panel at Chunadari, which is enhanced. You can see iconographically the important characters. This is probably the Shikha, this T-shaped figure. And this also took us a long time to understand what is this hairstyle. Now, this is the same hairstyle as at Mindem. If I take you back to that arrow crossfire, can we please go back to that arrow crossfire panel for a bit? 2 or 3 slides before at Windham, there was this madam. Uh, Shall we go back further? One or two more. More. This is the one. You can see the hairstyle over here is this T. So this probably is the Shikha, which seems to be an ethnic identity marker. So maybe go to the subaltern painting at this one. So in he is also the water carrier. Now my student and I, we were surveying the area around, trying to understand how medieval soldiers are depicted over there. Where did they come from? Was it just an act of imagination? And I told him to actually go and have a look at it, and he came back and reported, said, "This is a go down." I said, "What was a go down doing over here?" So we went and explored this, and this is a small castle. This is called the Latifpur Fort. It was the gazetteer, Drake Brockman's gazetteer of 1911 mentions that there was a zamindar in mid 18th century called Malik Farooq who built 2 forts. One was at Aurora, short distance from here, and this is near Likhaniadari. This is the Latifpur Fort. And then there's one of the famous painters, landscape painters, who actually also did a sketch of this. So it is his soldiers who would find time when they're off duty to come in to this river gorge next to the fort and would hunt with the help of locals, and they probably paid them to make some of their paintings to make it more lucrative. So this is actually a proper historical record. and shows a certain amount of iconic skill also existing until the medieval period. And soldier marches and paintings appear almost simultaneously in all parts, in all rock art sites of Mirzapur and Sonbhadra. In simple terms, sort of indicating the arrival of the medieval or early late historical feudalism in this particular area, in which the zamindar soldiers actually probably went around on flag marches warning everybody that their goods must come to them, if not their rents or revenue. So here's a hunting scene from Morana Pahad. This was probably also seen. There are three elephants over here with uh, individuals holding spears on top. This is probably a rhino or a wild buffalo over here, done a bit stylistically. And this is a medieval hunt scene in Morana Pahad, uh, shelter 8 probably. So if that is the Mesolithic to medieval history record over here, I mean, how does it connect with lowland agriculture originating around? These are the terraces of the Billion River at Koldiva, which we covered last year, and there are these enormous terraces next to it. There's a local farmer, and they are growing these pulses and so on. So, to conclude, therefore, so what is the relationship between the Neolithic in the plains and that in the hills, and what is the genetic link between populations and the overall population history of the India of the area, and what role can rock art play in giving us real-time information in that sense? So, to conclude, art for art's sake, yes, to some extent that is probably correct. When where children are making it, they are learning how to sort of draw and paint to acquire the symbolic skill. They will probably grow up and become craftsmen. Certainly, early historic period onwards, and urbanization gets going all the way from Bhabua, where the Vindhyas start in Bihar, to southern Uttar Pradesh and up to Bharuch district in Gujarat. The entire Central Valley urbanizes almost simultaneously, as we know from our lessons in early history, and the hill dwellers actually become the supply side of things. Supplying what? Supplying wild uh, resources like stone and trees and wood and lac and silk and whatever else actually grows up there. And there's a lovely paper by one M.K. Jha from Singapore University on what role the Vindhyas actually uh, played in the urbanization in the Ganges Valley. Because of the slightly higher rainfall, they are a better location for domestication of both cattle and also early food items like rice and others, millets. And therefore, it is some supply side things. And the origin of craft, pottery, Mesolithic pottery is there. Iron is Professor Vibha Tripaঠি's work and Dr. Rakesh Tiwari's work at Rajan Al Katila. It proves beyond doubt that iron came into existence around 1500 BC or so over there. So iron ingots have also been found at Raipura. So they were probably prepared, and iron was exchanged with lowland communities. So the business of crafting of the post Neolithic society, early Iron Age society, and the role of iconic skills in that is extremely important. And rock art is the absolute sort of source that we are looking at for understanding how, as soon, no, as soon as early history dawns, that exquisite sculpture are being made. There are many communities over there, like Rajbhar, who were identified in the Gazetteer of 1911 as master builders of forts. And there are Gond communities. W.G. Archer notes that it's the Gond craftsmen who used to make the memorial stones for the Yadava or the pastoral communities of Kaimur, Bhabua, Rohtas, that is the foothills of the Vindhyas. So this locks in with longer term cognitive and skill histories, craft histories of the eastern part of our country, and no doubt it is a general sort of condition if we spare time to look at what various sectors of society were doing, how socialization was taking place. So I would like to end this talk with a plea that rock art should not be seen in isolation as if it is some prehistoric curiosity. It is no curiosity at all. It is entirely the product, as Merlin Donald suggests, of a socialization of humans from the earliest times, and it is the vehicle. It pervades language, it pervades cognition, and for skilling of children and making them craft savvy, that this whole exercise was undertaken. So it's an important resource, and it should be studied as a historical resource. Thank you.
Sir, I have some questions. Because I'm having some net problem, I will just ask you over the phone if you can just answer them. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. First of all, I have a question. 1 minute. From Badri Seshadri. He wants to know, how do you estimate the time period of rock art?
Different.
Huh?
No, but I mean,
Can you hear me, sir?
there's no replacement for accurate dating. That is the. But the iconography is a big indicator. Like in the case of medieval rock art, we even have colonial paintings of colonial buggies being local and so on, which must date from the 19th century actually. So the later art is here. The stupa are also unmistakable, so we could say they are early historic. But before that, some accurate dating has to be used to answer your
Okay.
question.
Sir, another thing he wants to know is, in terms of the colors that have been used in these rock arts, if you see, there was a lot of blue there, no? But I thought blue actually came from lapis lazuli, which came much later to India. So what is it that they used for pigments here? All those brilliant pinks, greens, blues, like what was used here to create those kind of colors?
There is no blue. I put a caveat in front of the lecture that the colors you see are not the true colors of paintings. I've had to detach most of the images through the digital software to see what has been painted. So I'm
Oh,
sorry, what's his name? Mr. Krishnan. Ah, I'm sorry, those are not the true colors that you saw, sir. That is
Mr.
the
Badri.
de-stretch color. Dr. Shivatri, I'm sorry about that. If I conveyed the impression that that was the true color, I declared at the beginning that we have processed the slides digitally to
Okay.
stretch each color out so we can see what was painted. Much of the rock art
Oh,
is very badly faded due to lack of conservation. So those are not the
oh,
true colors.
okay.
Most
So Ravi Shankar
often
wants
it
to
is the
know.
ferric.
So Ravi
Who?
Shankar wants to know that there is a presumption
Yeah.
that rock art was created by the dwellers of that place. Could they have been created by people who were moving through that place?
Yes. Is that Dr. T.S. Ravi Shankar from
No,
Bangalore?
sir. He's T. Ravi Shankar.
TC Ravishankar. Okay, there is one case of an inscription that we found inside this Lekhaya shelter from which Mesolithic skeletons from 8000 BC have been excavated by Allahabad University. There's actually a 14th century pilgrim's inscription written in rock art style with fingers using the ferric paint. And not only in our project, but other workers like Ravindranath Singh, R.K. Tiwari, and many other people have found Shankha inscriptions written in ferric oxide inside caves that were occupied during the Mesolithic.
So, sir,
So
as an
this is
extension of
the
this,
area where you
sir,
pilgrims
as an
were moving.
extension of this, can we say that when you analyze these rock arts, cultural aspects of later times have been derived from these rock arts? Like whatever you see here, can we take it that the cultural, whatever aspects of later times have derived from these rock arts in terms of either the hairstyles, tikka, as you said, or
For the
jewelry, or
indigenous
their practices?
community, certainly. For the community that paints it, certainly the value is derived. Otherwise, why would they paint?
Okay.
So even now there are examples of folk art. Madhubani art is actually used to be made in
Yeah,
bridal chambers,
yeah.
and so on. Uh, yeah.
So, then Shobana Ramkumar wants to know, were there any learnings from early rock paintings that were employed by later cave paintings like Ajanta and cave paintings in South India, etc.?
I think she should do a PhD on that subject. I would, because it requires a bit of thought. It cannot be just one cannot answer it like that. Obviously, there was a link between early historic urbanization represented by Buddhist establishments in the countryside. There is a paper by, what's his name, Peter Skilling. Peter Skilling has written a wonderful paper about stupas occurring next to prehistoric painted caves in the central Indian region. There are half a dozen places where historic period stupas were built right next to caves. We have seen one ourselves at Talpura in near Hoshangabad. It's a protected site by Archaeological Survey of India. There are two Mauryan period stupas sitting right next to a huge painted shelter that was inhabited from prehistoric to historic times, because the depictions like over here show the change of material culture. So what is a stupa doing there? So
So
stupa is
Nick Boyce,
actually this for interacting with forest dwellers from the earliest of times in the interest of the state.
so Nick Boyce wants to know,
It's in
what
their
are the challenges to conserve the pigments that are attached to these rock substrates?
No, wait a minute. I've not finished with the last question, which is a very
Oh, I'm so
interesting one.
sorry, sir. I'm
No,
sorry,
what
sir.
is
I'm
the
really
link?
sorry.
What is the link? It's a very important point. What is the link between Buddhist art, and particularly those that were drawn inside caves, and the early inhabitation in centuries BC of Buddhists next to prehistoric caves? It is it is a non-random pattern in the central Vindhyan ranges that Buddhist establishments are in, you know, in these areas. So some design sense was also being exchanged, or at least city-dwelling Buddhist monks were able to see a new start at prehistoric caves and use some of those mineral colors and designs to actually create. It's only a hypothesis which must be tested through proper research.
Sir, let me also apologize
Sorry, I
that
missed
because
this
of the
question.
problems in the mic connection, your voice is also constantly dropping. So I'm always not able to hear what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. So this is regarding Nick Boyce. He wants to know, what are the challenges to conserve the pigments attached to the rock substrates?
It is from the first to last, that is the biggest challenge, because once the it's a very good question. Once the pigment wears off, there is no art left over there, and there's only de-stretch, uh, and the story is finished. Now, this is for the agency like Archaeological Survey of India to see that Indian history lives not only in our urban monuments but also in the prehistoric caves, because it is our history over there. It is not some other people's history, which is the general colonial perspective on the subject. In many countries where rock art exists, in Australia, in North America, when they study rock art, they are studying in other people, they are studying in other society. But that is not the case in India. We are looking at our own ancestral history when we are looking at data
So
connected with Indian
before
prehistory.
concluding, I have one question of my own, which is, what is the major difference between Indian rock art and rock art found elsewhere in the world? Is there any major difference? Are there any major pointers here, markers here, which distinguish our rock art from rock art of the rest of the world?
I mean, if you ask the most scientifically inclined researcher, they'll probably give you a list of 1,000 differences. I don't see there's any difference I was at the Indo-Pacific Prehistory Association conference in Chiang Mai in November 2022. I saw rock art from Oceania and Polynesia and Micronesia. It is exquisite. It is just the same. It is people recording their history. It is not some alien practice at all. It is just, pure thoroughbred historical
Sir, in terms of
scientific.
artistic style, is there any major difference, or even that is more or less overlapping?
Yes, of course, the local notions of form and content will obviously apply. So yes, of course, there is difference. You can see it on
Sir,
the in various websites.
So one last question from Badri Seshadri. Are there any religious aspects that we get to study or learn from in this rock art? Like what is the type of religion they had, or what are the type of practices they followed vis-a-vis religion? Is there anything that we are able to learn from here?
Well, we know from, sir, we know, it's a very good question. We know from ethnography. For instance, the Encyclopedia Mundarica, written by Hoffman and others in Chotanagpur, the whole 10-volume encyclopedia is full of spiritual concepts and ghosts and spirits of all kinds, and which are real concepts. So uh, there's also mythology recorded even in Santhal Pargana, and origin tales, and Bedo Abba and so on, as various people believed, and there's a system of fictive kinships and so on. So the whole cosmology in amongst indigenous communities. So it would not be a surprise.
Hello.
Siddhant?
Yeah. So with that, I
Yes.
think we've come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful lecture with so much of insight, and those paintings were really, really amazing and so beautiful. And we thank you so much for your valuable time and effort in joining us and delivering this lecture. Thank you so much, sir. I think my net is totally gone now. So, hello.
Well, yeah.
Can you hear
Thank
me,
you
sir?
very much, madam. I really
Yeah.
sincerely give my
Yeah,
heartfelt
and
thanks.
really, I sincerely apologize for all the issues that were there today in terms of lag in the transfer of slides and the drop in audio quality frequently. I really don't know. I'm not able to fix it. I don't know what happened to the net connection at my end. I'm extremely sorry for that, sir. And thank you so much for this wonderful lecture and the patience with which you delivered it through all these lectures and patiently answering all our questions. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Shyam, is there anything you want to add?